Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, on the conference for the media investors and analysts with respect to the TAURON Group's financial results for the third quarter of 2023. The host of today's meeting is Mr. Krzysztof Surma, the Vice President of the Management Board for Finance. My name is Łukasz Zimnoch. I'm the press spokesman of TAURON Polska Energia Company, and I will be conducting today's conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the presentation will be conducted in Polish alongside the simultaneous interpreting into English. Outside of the broadcast, you can listen in to today's meeting using the teleconference mode of operation. Already, I'd like to ask you to send questions using the form that's available on the broadcast website. That's the only option that you have to ask questions, so please use that form. Mr. President, let's move on to the presentation, then traditionally we'll be holding a Q&A session. Please, let's go ahead with the presentation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I had a pleasure to conduct the conference for Q3 2023. In Q3 2023, we were dealing with good financial results posted by the group. On one hand, very good financial results. On the other hand, very weak, much weaker operating results. This mix of data means that in total we're dealing with good data. Data regarding revenue and EBITDA themselves were the historical highs. The group posted the EBITDA after Q3 close to 5.5 billion PLN. At the same time, the group also generated high revenue, more than 20% higher year over year, generating more than 32 billion PLN after 3 quarters on a cumulative basis. At the same time, that's a Q3 on a cumulative basis, we posted the net profit of 2,258 million PLN. These good operating data meant that our net debt to EBITDA ratio after Q3 came in at 1.6, and thus it was at a satisfactory and very safe level from the point of view of the financing agreement. With respect to the CapEx, they went up by 11% year over year. I will be elaborating on that on the subsequent slides. Regarding the weaker operating data, here we are dealing, unfortunately, with a decline of volume of electricity distributed. It's about a 5% decline regarding the first 3 quarters of this year versus first 3 quarters of last year. We were dealing also with a decline of electricity production from renewable energy sources. The main reason for that decline is the decline of the biomass-fired generation units output and the high price of the biomass. Regarding the production of coal-fired units, we have a significant decline year over year, more than 20% decline. And this was caused both by the electricity consumption decline in Poland, the decline of the production of electricity in Poland. I will write on the subsequent slide. At the same time, the high coal prices, hard coal prices, and the merit order of the coal-fired units owned by TAURON Polska Energia, also regarding based on the profitability of those units in the national electricity system, national power system. At the same time, we also dealt with a decline of a heat generation. Here, the weather conditions are the main reason behind this. Last year, the temperature was lower than the average. The average temperature was lower than in the first 3 quarters of this year. We are talking, first of all, here the first quarter and the end of Q3 as well, because they, as a matter of fact, determine the intensity of the heating season. Regarding the retail electricity supply, also a minimum drop regarding the comparable data year over year. Let's move on to the data for Q3 alone. Here the trends are similar in terms of EBITDA, a very good quarter. In terms of revenue, slightly smaller rise quarter over quarter. I will expand on that on the subsequent slides. Regarding the operating data, they are also very similar to the ones for the 3 quarters. Here, what's worth mentioning, the first one The first aspect worth noting is the positive growth rate of volumes from the renewable energy sources. And the second aspect is a greater decline regarding heat generation. Here one has to say that the heating season began last year in September. This year, September was very warm, and thus the heating season got shifted till the next month. If we look at the highlights of this year, most of them have already been discussed by us during the Q1 conference call and the H1 conference call. Let me remind you that the main aspect that was the subject of the works of the group, the key importance for the group, is the works on the negotiations of the key terms regarding the spin-off of coal assets. We expanded on that during the last conference regarding the events that took place after the balance sheet date and after the last earnings conference call. Here, what's worth mention is the signing of the agreement BGK worth 750 million PLN. It's a revolving credit agreement. And the second important event that's very important from the point of view of TAURON Group is a matter of ratings assigned by Fitch Ratings. Again, TAURON got the investment grade rating, BBB, with a stable outlook and with significant pointing to the distribution as our key segment based on which the earnings and the financial stability of TAURON Group is built upon. Let us move on to the CAPEX. Here we are observing an increase year over year by 11%. What's worth noting is that the beneficiaries of that growth with respect to the individual segments year over year is the distribution, the renewables lines of business. Let us remember that last year we also used to have a mining subsidiary in our structure of our group, and the lack of investment in this area was basically shifted to a significant degree to distribution. It's more than 30% up the capex in that segment, and practically in the distribution line of business, the capex came in at close to 2 billion PLN. The key area, more than 50% of the capital spending, was allocated to the new grid connections, new consumer grid connection, 1.06 billion. In addition, also the grid refurbishment overhaul spending went up year over year. The second beneficiary, the renewables line of business, more than 30+% increase year over year. Currently, we are in the process of constructing 6 new generation sources, 2 photovoltaic farms and 4 wind farms, with the capacity of close to 230 megawatts. The other lines of business, also the capex in the heat line of business, the refurbishment, replacement, capital spending in generation, and quite significant expenditures in the IT and lighting areas. The very macroeconomic situation this year was marked by a slowdown, economic slowdown. For quite some time, the PMIs have been coming in at below 50 points, which means that they continue to indicate a recession environment. This had to be reflected in the decline of electricity consumption. This decline is close to 5% if we compare the data year over year. This, in turn, has an impact upon the decline of production output, this decline of electricity consumption, alongside with increase of imports. Let us note that last year, Poland used to be the exporter next exporter of electricity prices in Poland were lower than the adjacent countries. This year the situation is reversed, has been reversed. The prices in Poland are higher than the neighboring countries, and thus we are dealing with a change in the balance exports and imports. This year we are a net importer of electricity. These two factors, the economic slowdown, the decline of electricity consumption, plus the electricity imports from outside Poland, means that we have a close to 9% decline of electricity generation in Poland. And what's worth noting here is how this decline in production is spread over individual sources. This partly explains the weak operating results in our generation segment at a more than 20% decline regarding the volume of electricity generated, because in Poland we observed a significant increase of the production in the renewables area. We are dealing here with a close to 20% increase year over year. We have a clear rebound, a strong rebound in the production from the gas-fired units. The key factor, of course, is the issue of a significant decline of the gas prices, natural gas prices year over year, and we have a very significant decline of the production both from the lignite-fired units as well as the hard coal-fired units. And here, in the case of the hard coal-fired units, as you can see on this graph, generally nationwide is more than 13% decline. In case of our units, more than 20%. As I mentioned, this is the result of profitability rate ranking in the merit order, and we unfortunately are the negative beneficiary of a decline of electricity consumption or electricity generation from the hard coal-fired units. Let us move on to the detailed financial data for the first 3 quarters of 2023. Here, let me go back to the issue of the revenue. As I mentioned, the revenue, we have a more than 20% increase year over year. The main issue here is the increase of electricity sales price, and the second key factor is the increase of the rate of the price of the distribution services. Here, the rate for the distribution of electricity services, and these two factors to a large degree determine this increase year over year. If we talk about the net profit, here one can say that for first time since a long time, we had a time when we didn't have major impairment charges, write-downs related to the assets on the group level, and therefore the net profit generated year over year is significantly higher this year. The second part is related to EBITDA. EBITDA also, the recurring year over year adjusted by one-offs, stripping out one-offs, is significantly higher. Looking at the number of one-off events, we can see how many one-off events took place this year too. Let us remember this year is quite special because practically there is no segment in our group that wasn't impacted quite significantly by the legislative regulations which were introduced at the end of last year and also this year. And they had an impact both on the recurring earnings as well as the one-off events. And this is worth remembering, discussing the full year results this year. But that's true. EBITDA year over year is significantly higher. A positive impact on this EBITDA came from the balance of the, as far as one of events, is the balance of the upward adjustment in the distribution line of business. The negative impact came from the provision set up in Q3 in the supply segment to reduce the household bills by 125 PLN. An additional positive impact came from the Rafako damages, and EBITDA alone, recurring EBITDA, is a bit lower than the reported value due to a number of significant one-off events. And on the other hand, it's significantly higher versus last year. Let us remember when at that time we had a long number of events that had a negative impact, especially on the generation segment. I will expand on that later on. Regarding Q3 alone, here a significant market improvement regarding quarter-to-quarter comparison. But let us remember, this is the time when last year we were setting up, first of all, a provision for onerous contracts. Secondly, last year we were also dealing with an outage of the Nowa Jaworzno unit didn't operate. And at that time, at the worst moment regarding electricity prices, we were doing a lot of buybacks on the market. So that's why such a big difference in the results year-on-year in Q3 23 versus 22. And looking at individual segments, again, one should emphasize that our key segment is distribution. As always, its results, its earnings make up the key part of our EBITDA. The distribution's EBITDA after 3 quarters is close to 3.5 billion PLN. What's worth noting is very good result of the generation segment this year after a very weak results last year and a big loss, wide loss. This year, EBITDA in the generation segment already topped 1 billion PLN. Moving on to Q3, here you can clearly see that the distribution segments are a key line of business. More than 90% of the earnings in Q3 came from the distribution line of business. The negative impact on the EBITDA came from the one-off event. This is the provision that I already mentioned. The provision set up in the supply line of business, which is due to the regulation that was introduced, and it translates into the reduction of bills for all the consumers that meet the criteria defined in that regulation. The provision, as I remind you, that we disclosed it was 566 million PLN. Moving on to EBITDA and the distribution of EBITDA, demonstrating the impact, how the EBITDA was changing in the individual lines of business year over year. Again, you can see clearly that the biggest contributor, positive contributors to the earnings were the distribution and the generation segments. As I mentioned, the distribution segment, after a very wide loss last year, we have clearly better results, and that's why such a big difference in the earnings year over year, more than 1.7 billion PLN. In the distribution line of business, let me draw your attention to one-off events. And here the upward adjustment balance, I will come to that when I discuss the segments. Regarding the other segments, especially the renewables and the supply segments, one should emphasize here that the earnings of these segments were impacted by the legislative events and the one-off events. The one-off events include, are related to the supply segment, first of all, and the provision that was set up regarding the renewables segment. Here we have the impact of regulations and the price caps that were imposed based on the act and the regulation that had been passed at the end of last year. If we move on to the results for Q3 alone, you can see that two segments have a positive big impact upon the increase of EBITDA year over year, and the negative impact comes from this is the distribution and generation, of course, whereas the negative impact comes from the supply segment, as I mentioned before. Here on this Q3 alone results, you can see best the impact of provision that was set up that determined the earnings in Q3. Moving on to the in-detailed analysis of individual segments, in case of the distribution segment, I would like to draw attention regarding the positive aspects of the impact on this 3.5 billion EBITDA, I would like to draw attention to two aspects. The first one is the upward adjustment balance. I already mentioned it third time because since Q1 this effect can be observed, but it is worth noting once again the pricing implication of this adjustment is around 600 million PLN, and it's worth noting when the Q1 of next year, looking at the market trends and the current price on the market, which will be the basis probably for agreeing upon the price with the President of the Energy Regulatory Office. In Q1 next year, we'll be dealing with a reverse effect. This is worth noting. We've been noting that since the beginning of this year, but is to a certain extent, in effect, to a certain degree, one-off, and it's very highly dependent upon the price difference on the market. We do not expect this to be reversed, to apply to the entire amount, 600 million PLN, but a part of it will probably be reversed in Q1 next year. The second aspect that had a very positive impact upon the earnings in the first 3 quarters is the margin on the distribution service. As a matter of fact, an increase of the distribution rate, increase of WACC, and the increase of the distribution rate as a result. This has a very positive impact and is spread uniformly throughout the year, whereas from the cost point of view, the level of the smart is impacted by the cost of a difference of the balancing differences, the covering of the balancing differences. This balancing difference is not spread so uniformly throughout the year. It's more heavy. The company is more burdened with differences in the first and fourth quarter, especially Q4. The company is burdened most by that. So that's why I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the earnings per quarter will not be spread uniformly. Already you can see it in the first 3 months, and the earnings for Q1 and Q4 probably will not be spread evenly. Of course, we will be waiting until what's the final result on the balancing difference, but statistically it's not spread uniformly throughout the year. This year, due to the cost of the balancing difference, it has a significant impact upon the earnings, which you can already see after Q3, because the distribution rate already includes this cost. So the revenue part already includes this uniform distribution of that cost, while the cost of the balancing differences, whereas the balancing differences themselves are estimated, adjusted after each quarter, and they are not distributed evenly, uniformly. So that's why the difference between quarters could be significant. In terms of the negative impacts in this segment, 2 issues should be noted. The first one is, of course, the settlement of the regulatory account. We already brought it up before. As a matter of fact, in case of a change in the volume in the given year, if we have a positive impact from that, for that reason, the N+1 in the given year, it is placed on the regulatory account. When in the N+2 period, it is deducted, and by deducting this positive result from a previous year, so then it has a negative impact. So a good year 2021 has a negative impact upon the revenue in 2023. And the volume that we are now showing as the second negative impact, the second 273 million, that happens to be the same numbers, but they have nothing to do with each other. The weak result this year, the decline of volume, 193 million, is also placed on the regulatory account. It will be returned to the company in the N+2 period if this balance stays at that level until the end of this year. Regarding the Q3 alone earnings, Here, it can clearly see that you don't have such a big price impact regarding the upward adjustment balance. As I mentioned, this is more visible in Q1, and it's worth noting again the uneven distribution of distribution rate versus the cost of the balancing difference. Looking at the quality parameters for the distribution segment, here another quarter during which all the parameters set by the President of the Energy Regulatory Office have been met. So as of now, we don't see any risk as far as there's a negative deviation and the impact of a negative deviation on the tariffs next year. So no negative impact upon the tariff in the subsequent years because we meet the parameters required. Moving on to the renewable segment. In this segment, as a matter of fact, let me start with the positives. The positive impact came from the volume of electricity generated. Let's remember that the renewables does not include the biomass-fired units. This segment only includes the production of the hydropower plants, wind farms, and the photovoltaic farms. And this year is getting better and better year over year, mainly due to the production of the hydroelectric power plants. This volume is roughly about 10% increase year over year. We have a slightly higher production from the wind farms, but let's remember that we commissioned new capacities, so the very wind conditions year over year have been a bit weaker, and these were the positive impacts, whereas the negative impact comes from the issue of the pricing and the price caps that were introduced based pursuant to the legal act, and the second negative impact is the declining prices of the carbon credits. The obligation to redeem green certificates was lowered, that had an impact automatically upon the price on the market and has an impact upon the earnings of the renewables segment. Regarding Q3 alone, the impact of those factors had an impact upon the renewables segment is very similar as for the first 3 quarters. So volume production continues to have a positive impact, a little better, and the negative impact comes from the pricing issues, both prices of electricity as well as the property rights. In the generation segment, I already touched some issues, but I'll go back to the last year's issues. Last year, we were dealing with 2 issues. First of all, for a large portion of the year, the new Jaworzno unit was not operational, especially in the second part of the year when the unexpected failure occurred in August last year. The company had to buy back electricity at very high prices on the market, which generated, of course, a large loss. We disclosed that in our regulatory filings. In addition, the company had to set up a provision for onerous contracts. Let's remember that last year the hard coal prices went up significantly, and it led to the lack of profitability on some contracts concluded in the preceding years on the market, and we are not dealing with the situation this year anymore. This year, the prices of the contracts, of course, concluded still in 2022 versus the forward prices of the market in 2022. They cover both the hard coal prices, which are of course high. In addition, this year we are dealing with a stable operation of the unit, and even if there are buybacks, for instance, due to the fact that the units are not operating due to the recommendations of TSO or due to the profitability of that from the commercial point of view, we are dealing with a positive result on the buybacks. Over year situation is completely different. Last year we had to buy back electricity at very high prices, much higher than the ones we had contracted. We generated a major loss for the TAURON generation subsidiary this year situation has been reversed. All the buybacks that we do on the market generate a positive result, and which means that year over year we have a significant, very significant leap in the EBITDA generated. The second factor, which is of lesser importance but still significant as a one-off event that we also mentioned during the previous conferences, is the settlement of the Rafaco contract and the damages received because of that in the amount of 225 million PLN. Regarding the earnings of Q3 in the generation segment, you can see even more clearly the difference that I mentioned. Let's remember, August last year, a failure of a new Jaworzno unit. In addition, we show the provisions for onerous contracts. These two factors, stripping them out, means that year over year we have very strong growth of the earnings. However, you can see the EBITDA itself for Q3 is quite strongly normalized, and in general it's not as high, 128 million PLN. Also, to a certain degree, is due to high hard coal prices on the market. If we move on now to the supply segment, here the key element is a one-off event that I already mentioned, the setting up of a provision for worth 125 PLN. The provision set up in Q3, it significantly reduced the earnings year over year. However, it's also worth noting certain positives. Regarding the positive aspects, again, this year we have a fully passed on cost in tariff G, which of course has a positive impact upon the earnings of the segment. Negative implications, negative impacts come from the write-downs, from the impairment charges, if the financial condition of some customers has deteriorated, and therefore for some accounts receivable we had to book a write-down impairment charge, and this impairment charge has a negative impact on the earnings of the segment. Another negative impact comes from the value of the write-down. The majority of the write-downs in TAURON, in contrast to the other electric utilities in Poland, and this is focused in TAURON in supply agreement, about 30 million plus is been booked as this write-down has a negative impact on its earnings. If we move on to the Q3 earnings of the supply segment, as a matter of fact, the key event that I again repeat is the provision that was set up, and this provision meant that practically the entire EBITDA result in this quarter was consumed by the provision that was set up. Moving on to the debt and financing topic now, as I mentioned, after the balance sheet date, we signed a loan agreement with BGK. At this point, we have about 4 billion PLN of available financing. The maturities over the next few years are not very large. Of course, they are significant, but not very large. And the earnings generated at the EBITDA level, as well as the good management of the working capital, means that after Q3 we have a net debt to EBITDA ratio of 1.6, which is a very satisfactory level. Nevertheless, the key aspect for the financing area in the subsequent months, years, will be the issue of spinning off the generation assets, because this will determine the ability to obtain financing also from the liquid the point of view, the issue of a payment for the CO2 emissions will be a certain challenge in the subsequent years if this segment were not to be spun off from a point of view of the provisions of a finance agreement, not so much the availability of the financing itself. That's all regarding the data and the presentation. Let's have a Q&A session. A number of questions have been sent, some of them very elaborate. Let me remind you that the only way that you can ask questions is to use a form available on the broadcast website. The first question, what is the reason for such a small write-downs for the fund price change fund payout? It was 450 million PLN. At Enea it is 2.1 billion PLN, and at PG it's 4.8. So, Mr. President, well, first of all, let me start with the structure of the production and supply and sales of individual utilities. Let us remember, in PG, first of all, in that case, the structure of electricity generation production is totally different than in case of TAURON. TAURON basically is player number 3 on the market, with a relatively small share in the electricity generation market. PG is number 1 player and number 2. So the generation segment in our group has a much lower weight than the other energy groups. Secondly, the issue of profitability of those units. Let us remember that we have a lot of 200 megawatt units in our group. Already in our presentation, you could see how low the production is, how much it dropped year over year in the generation segment, and thus the amount of impairment charges, or the charges, I'm talking about the charge in the generation segment. It's, as I mentioned in the presentation, the major portion of the charge is the charge in the supply segment. Of course, the price caps are different in that segment. This price cap is based on the margin, and basically the charge appears in the supply line of business in TAURON Polska Energia, around 30-35 million PLN. In the generation segment, it's only 65 million PLN. As I said, it is due to the volume of electricity generated and the profitability of electricity generation. That's such a wise reason for such a big difference in the charges between our energy groups. Another question, or a group of questions: does the company see the risk of setting up a provision in the supply segment, taking into account the interpretation of the President of the Energy Regulatory Office regarding the incorrect settlements performed by the electric utilities? In case of TAURON, in contrast to PG, you have seen higher bills invoicing for customers versus the what's legally required. Was it justified? Were the customers excluded from the act on the cap on the margins? I will not be answering from PG. I will start with a simpler part of the question. I haven't analyzed the approach of PG regarding the issue of incorrect billing. As of now, no one has determined that yet. First of all, we are dealing with a certain interpretation of the President of the Energy Regulatory Office. Of course, in our company, we reviewed it. We are analyzing it. We are also conducting legal analysis regarding this topic. However, let us remember that the first analysis indicates that when one should make a charge based on, book a charge based on the hypothetical revenue, based on the initial review, what was published on the Energy Regulatory Office's website. It's difficult to agree with this approach. However, let us remember that TAURON is a member of Electricity Trading Association. This association also sent a letter regarding this topic to the President of the Energy Regulatory Office. Of course, we identify align with this position. As I said, we are in the process of analysis. If such a situation were to occur that the company came to the conclusion that its approach is incorrect regarding making charges to the price difference fund, that would make recalculations, that would have to set up a certain provision and make an appropriate disclosure, regulatory filing in such a case. But as of now, as I said, we are in the process of analyzing this topic, this issue, and the first review indicates that the calculating the charge on the hypothetical revenue or income is not justified. Next question, has the company taken part in this year's renewables auctions? What capacity did the company acquire? For what sources? Did the company receive the entire amount of claims agreed upon as part of a settlement agreement with RAFACO? And once again, also let me read number 3, question number 4 regarding the RAFACO deal. Have all the provisions of the settlement agreement with RAFACO have been implemented? Does TAURON and RAFACO cooperate regarding the Jaworzno project or any other project? Well, let's go one by one. Have we taken part in the auctions? No, we have not taken part in the auctions this year. Regarding the receipt of the funds, yes, we have received, not really from RAFACO, but from bank guarantees. Yes, the funds have been received. Have everything been fulfilled? Basically, yes. Of course, we have one more item regarding the settlements with the insurance company. Here we both, ourselves and RAFACO, expect a certain payout of damages from the insurance company, but it doesn't have an impact upon the implementation of the provisions of settlement agreement that was concluded. So let me confirm that all the funds we have received and the settlement agreement has been implemented, has been performed. Regarding what was, do TAURON and RAFACO still cooperate regarding any project in Jaworzno or any other project? Well, TAURON following the conclusion of the settlement agreement, TAURON fully supervises the operations and is operating the Nowe Jaworzno, the new Jaworzno unit. RAFACO is not involved in that. I'm not familiar with any project where we were to cooperate as of now with RAFACO. Now a very extensive question from editor Sawicki from Rzeczpospolita. In conjunction with the tariff-related regulation, the reduction of electricity prices for household by 125 PLN, will TAURON submit a request, an application for an adjustment of a tariff for this year still? What is the position of TAURON regarding the guidelines regarding the price difference payout charge? Do you share the charges also related to the applicable to the compensation for the profit lost? So how much would TAURON have to pay back if we were sticking strictly to the guidelines of the Energy Regulatory Office? So let's start with those questions first, 1 and 2. So in conjunction with the tariff regulation and the reduction of household invoices, will TAURON submit a petition, an application for an adjustment of the tariff for this year? TAURON hasn't submitted such an application, and as of now, as far as my knowledge is concerned, is not intending to apply application for a tariff adjustment for this year. However, in line with the regulations force, we have submitted the tariff applications both in the supply area and in the distribution area, and we are in the process of tariffing process regarding the tariffs for next year. And of course, those tariff applications may also be may also have references regarding to the payout to the customers of those 125 PLN. The second question, what is the position of TAURON regarding the guidelines for the calculation of a charge to the price difference fund? Do you share, do you agree with the interpretation of the President of Energy Resources that the charge should also be applicable to the lost revenue payout? How much would TAURON have to pay back if you were to be in line with the interpretation of the office? Well, I already answered this question partly. It seems that this interpretation is excessive, I would say. It would also be applicable to the hypothetical revenue. Of course, for our own needs, we are calculating that, but we are in the process of calculations, how much it could be. It's not a simple calculation. We are practically looking into each contract. We are trying to make these calculations. However, this position that was presented as of now seems excessive. Next question is related to the coal contracting. What is the situation regarding the coal contracting for the generating units for 2024? Have the contracts been already been signed, and why the PCME price, hard coal price, was at such a record level, despite the fact that we already passed the peak of energy crisis? Well, regarding the contracting issue, we are in the process of commercial negotiations. I don't want to disclose too much. Of course, they are very highly sensitive, and that's true. The company is in the process of agreement. Some of the contracts might be close to the finalization. Regarding the rest, so reference to the index, let us remember that the index has a certain historical feature, and contracts are also historical. So this was reflected also in our earnings. Both contracts for electricity that we are performing today, as well as the hard coal contracts, were concluded to a large extent last year, so during the energy crisis. And as I said, from our point of view, we take decisions on signing contracts based on the margins, so the CDS that we can obtain. So if the contract has a higher electricity price, then the hard coal price can also be higher. So this index, in fact, reflects the situation from last year and the performance of the last year's contract. Not so much, it doesn't reflect the current market situation, the contracting for the subsequent years. So in the subsequent years, we will see factually the actual situation in the index. In the company's report, there's a fourth question from Dr. Sawicki. We are seeing the extension of the decision about the maintaining the 200 megawatt units until the end of 2028, according to the decision, in line with the decision following the trilogue of the European Union. Is this decision about the extension of 200 megawatt units extension by 3 years is final, and will there be some overhauls planned, and the potential correction of the settlements with the NABE, National Energy Security Agency? Well, in the impairment test, we assumed the estimated revenue from potential capacity market. Of course, this capacity market has not been finally approved yet, so this does not predetermine definitely either the extension of the life cycle of these units or about the overhauls. This is just an assumption that was made for the impairment test purpose. Well, I mentioned about the answer about the overhauls, the correction of the settlements with the NABE, National Energy Security Agency. It's difficult to speak about it. Let us remember that we have prepared everything for the spin-off of the coal assets. What will be the formula of the spinning off of those assets? We'll probably find that out in the coming weeks or months, at a time when the government will be formed. It's a government concept. Therefore, we are, of course, prepared for the spin-off, but it's difficult to speak about the correction of any settlements because the very National Agency for Energy Security has not been yet set up. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, this was the last question that we have received. Let me refresh just to check if there's anything else new. That was the last question during today's earnings conference call. Let me invite you for the next meeting directly following the publishing of the 2023 full year report. We will provide the information about the date of the conference in a traditional manner. Thank you very much and see you next time. Also, thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a nice day.